manage 4%, 4.2%, 3%, hopefully this year, in terms of economic growth. Although I tend to believe personally that we could have had a monetary policy which should have been a little bit more flexible, a little bit more relaxed. Because for the simple reason that most of our manufacturing is based on imported inputs. We import everything that we need to produce for export. And as we all know, we import in US dollars and we export most of what we export in euros. And the imbalance, the décalage between the euro and the rates of exchange of the rupee vis-à-vis the euro, the rate of exchange of the rupee vis-à-vis the dollar, have been a little bit more than a little, actually, detrimental to the development of our manufacturing economy. I insist on manufacturing because manufacturing represents 18% of our GDP, which is a lot. This is the highest contribution, the sector which contributes the most to the GDP, number one. Number two, the downstream effects of manufacturing are probably among the most important amongst all the different sectors of the economy. And thirdly, because in terms of employment, manufacturing is a very important sector. So I really think that we could have avoided a policy where we had too much of a strong rupee. And I also believe that to a certain degree, a certain amount of inflation in the country is not necessarily bad, provided that, on the other hand, it allows us to expand our economic base and to expand our production and our income, of course.
I mean, that wasn't my intention, Minister. In fact, if I had one intention, was probably to lead you down the path of the specific measure that have been taken, to assist some enterprises in order to save jobs. Certainly not to get your finger, between the Accountancy General and the Bank of Mauritius. Now, Professor Kremer, I would like to ask you two questions, but unfortunately time doesn't permit. So I was very keen, to get your perspective on how do you domesticate the excesses of the financial market. But coming from Germany, I think I'll better ask you the second question. I think one of the main issues that many developing countries or emerging states face is basically how do we convince the big boys or the big girls, the G20s, the G8s, to coordinate the economic policies, to look in the same direction. I don't want to be unduly critical of the IMF. I was reading the latest report of the IMF, subsequent to the annual meeting in Tokyo. And the IMF came and said that, look, we overestimated the recessionary impact of austerity measures. Seems like you are in Germany, And we have underestimated the recessionary impact of austerity measures. And it took them 5 years of seeing what has happened in Greece to reach that conclusion. Now, my question to you, Professor, and I think this is more important than probably the sum total of all the micro measures that can be taken by developing countries. How do we resolve this, the talks at Doha, or the Doha agenda, that it's stalled? How do we get the big boys, to kickstart the global economy and also to increase trade? And how do we make them resist the temptation of either creeping or covert protectionism? But we see this coming. And is there hope in the near future? I mean, given that the recession is going to last longer and probably will be deeper, is there any hope, of getting all these big boys, not only in Europe, but the Japanese, the American, and even the BRIC, to look in the same direction, to coordinate the economic policies so that we can have recovery and at the same time, we can get more trade?
No. I mean, yeah, if I were so smart, I wouldn't sit here. Well, first thing is, at the IMF, it's a big girl, not a big boy, Madame Lagarde. And what I hear from her, this is my judgment, my personal judgment, that she is quite open to that. There are other forces. They are the Americans, and things might even get worse if next week or in 2 weeks the presidency will change, which might happen. And there's the German government. Now, you're asking me because I'm from Germany what I think about it, and I dislike the stance of my government. I mean, they are the force behind all the austerity programs in Europe. They want it because they have to sell to their voters it's German taxpayers' money, and you don't want to let it waste. So, and also what they did, what was a sin. You know, they betrayed us, they cooked the books and so on. Now they have to suffer. This is the popular narrative from the German politicians to the rest of the voters, and it's not easy to argue against this. But I was exactly surprised, like you, to read the IMF report. Now we figured out that austerity cannot work. I mean, they did it in so many other cases before. I mean, they should have learned the lessons. Now the question is, how can we push them to coordinate more? Well, if I knew that, you're right. Coordination is important, and my only slightly hope is really that coming from G7 over G8 to G20 brings up a new perspective. And I really hope that the emerging countries will widen the perspective and make clear that we have a global responsibility to share. But of course they have to, understand it and follow it. Advice, theory plays a big role. How are the advisors? If they follow a neoliberal stance, then of course the politicians will follow their advice, and I think nothing will change.
Thank you. Professor Maurice, you made three statements, and I was reflecting on each of them. I like the first one, and I think it's very sound advice. Never borrow as much as lenders want you to borrow. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I would tend to agree with this. The third one, I'll come to the second one. Never invest in an asset, the underlying value of which you don't know. I'm not so sure that I agree to this in all circumstances, and I want to be enlightened in this because you know very well, Mr. Seidersen said that we've got a structural problem in our export and import, that we import in dollars and we export in euro. And one of the things that most people are doing in this country is basically the use of derivatives in order to hedge your bet. And very often, you have to use them without knowing whether you have a very, very good grasp of basically what is happening. So I don't know whether you would treat, a credit default swap, or a derivative in currencies that will protect you, against your structural problem as a beast that should not be touched. I have a major problem with the third one, and would like to be guided by you on this. You said that when you're going to make an investment, and in many of our countries, you have to make investment that probably the private sector will never touch. And these investments have returned over 25 or 50 years. Now, if we follow your advice, that when you make a choice in terms of investment, you must make sure that the investment will still be profitable or will still be viable when the returns are extremely low. Now, my apprehension that if we were to follow this advice, probably there are many investments, especially in education, in health, in infrastructure, that might not pass the test. So I just want to be